to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Our program is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. Now, to help me with this week's news is one of our regular citizen reporters, Mr. Mark Bradley, who's back from vacation. So thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here, and I hope you had a restful vacation.
Well, I'm happy to be back, and as a vacation, it was very aggressive because we were traveling all the time. So right now, I'm ready to get back at it, and I've been looking at some articles here. If you remember, before I left, I brought in a whole bunch of oil paperwork that said that we are subsidizing the pipelines that are running both directions, and also the rail lines that are going both directions. So the reality is, we are actually subsidizing Canadians, and when we talk about other countries' influences, we have to look at our northern neighbors, our influences, but I really think it's the oil companies more than our northern neighbors. Because I think that if you take a look at the amount of pipelines they've built, if we're going to be allowing them to ship their oil through our states, and like I said, the Canadian crude, we've already been documenting through the last couple of shows that we've talked on, that it's really, the pipeline is this Enbridge Corporation that's part of the Canadian group. So if we weren't there and they had to ship it over the Rockies rather than shipping it down the mountains to this side, it would be a lot harder for them. But if they were to actually merge it, like I talked about, this international project to connect all the oil out to Duluth, and then it could be shipped off of the port of Duluth, which would really bring back that as a major port facility. It really would drive our nation as well.
Now, the article that Mr. Bradley is jumping off from is in the Star Tribune of, let's see here, that would be July 19th. And the article is entitled, North Dakota and Montana Team Against Oil Train Restrictions. And it says that shipping the region's crude by rail is common practice due to a limited number of pipelines. So that goes to that issue where you're talking about that conflict between using pipelines to transport the oil versus using the rail lines to pump that. And this, of course, talks about the fact that in a legal petition to the U.S. Department of Transportation, Montana Attorney General Tim Fox and North Dakota Wayne Steinheim said federal authority over the rail lines preempts any state law. And so they're trying to overrule a Washington state law that imposes new restrictions on oil trains from the northern plains to guard against explosive derailments.
Right.
So this is what they are working on. And so you've got, again, now this is another conflict that you didn't address, but that conflict between state rights versus federal preemption. And that can be a very complicated area of law.
And you find,
so what's next on your agenda there, Mr. Bradley?
Well, I was looking at, there's a Pigside project that's going to be building an island. That's all the silt that's being dredged out of the area of the Mississippi River. The Corps of Engineers wants to build Pigside Island in the Pigside Lake, which is part of St. Paul. And the question here, is it of advantage to St. Paul to take all this here when it really is nothing more than advantageous to get rid of dredgings that would have had to be dumped somewhere? Right.
Now, keep in mind, this area of the Mississippi River typically is protected by various federal and state legislation. Some of this area is in the Mississippi Critical Area. Some of that area along there is actually protected for view lines. And this particular article that Mr. Bradley's bringing up is in the Pioneer Press of August 4th, which says questions raised on Pig's Eye project where the neighbors seek input into the use of river dredging spoils to build islands. And it says that some East Side St. Paul community activists are concerned about a multi-million-dollar plan to build islands in the center of St. Paul's largest lake, questioning the need and effect and alleging a lack of public process. So this is actually in a lake area, and it says that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced weeks ago that they will be building 7 islands in the 638-acre Pig's Eye Lake in the city's Battle Creek neighborhood, using $11.5 million of their money and another $4.2 million from funding set up by the state's Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. They say that the lake is in bad shape because of the eroding shoreline, carp tearing at its bottom, and extra sediment from the Battle Creek, which empties into it. Now, Mr. Bradley, have you ever been to this Pig's Eye Lake area yourself?
Actually, I have been, because of when my dad was a young man, and you could still dump garbage within the confines of St. Paul. There was a Pig's Eye garbage disposal area right by where they also had the natural resources where they were breeding fish to be stocked across Minnesota at that point. So we would drive down there to dump our containers.
So Bradley, where is this lake then in relation to the Mississippi River?
Okay, along the Mississippi River, what you are actually looking at is where Highway 61 is. When you're taking that curve that goes down to Cottage Grove, which is a city just south of St. Paul, at that curve, there's a split off that you could always go down to Pig's Eye Lake area to. And that's, like I said, where when you were going up to on 61, which is at that point, I believe it's part of the Warner Road system, you would be able to go to on the left-hand side, you would be going towards the hatchery area, and on the right-hand side, you go down to where the lake was and the garbage disposal area was.
Right. Now it says here that former City Council member Tom Diamond and former State Representative Sheldon Johnson, both of whom live near the lake in the city's Highwood neighborhood, said they were caught unaware by the project and questioned its premise. Both are asking for at least one public input session about the project. In particular, Diamond objects to the Corps' use of 400,000 cubic yards of dredge spoils to build the islands, materials that were dredged from the bottom of the Mississippi River and placed in growing stockpiles. Quote, the proposed USACE project is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The USACE needs to get rid of polluted dredge spoils, Diamond said. Quote, if you ever get anyone down to see this park, they'd be raising holy hell, unquote. Now, of course, both Tim Diamond and Sheldon Johnson have been strong supporters of protecting the Mississippi Critical Area. So I'm glad that they're watching this project and watching out for the Mississippi Critical Area. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for bringing this article to our attention.
And I wanted to point out that you got to figure how much money is being spent irrationally again. But
well, coming up next, we're going to be focusing on a recent council meeting out of St. Paul. Now, this was actually not a council meeting that is where regular business is held, but it's at one of their organizational meetings, which is similar to a workshop. And so some of these organizational meetings, they have cable cast, others they only have the audio. This particular one, in the end of July, they had cable cast, and so we have video from that. We thought it would be particularly of interest to folks to listen in on the presentation that was given by the police chief Axtell to the St. Paul City Council, because we have covered a number of the stories over the past few months that have involved the St. Paul Police Department. And it's nice how his presentation actually touches on many of those stories, gives updates on what the St. Paul Police Department is doing, and also has some statistics. Now, as part of this presentation, he gave the council members an opportunity to ask whatever questions they wanted, so we do have some of the questions posed by the council members as well as the answers. So let's get started with this first clip, which is from that St. Paul City Council organizational meeting in July 2019.
Welcome to everybody who's here today, and welcome Chief Axtell.
Thank you very much, Council President Randall and council members. It's an honor to be here today, and it's especially an honor for me to be here today to see some of the progress we have made and the future of our department, which I am going to be able to talk about today. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about our St. Paul Guardians. As you know, St. Paul Police Department is a large, complex organization. We currently have 612 sworn personnel. Our authorized strength is 635, 145 civilian employees, and our officers respond to approximately 280,000 calls for service each and every year.
I thought it was important to include those statistics right from the get-go, because it gives us an understanding of really how large the St. Paul Police Department is and the number of calls that they respond to each year. So he was indicating that they have 612 sworn officers. That's a lot of police officers, but St. Paul is a big city. Right. And they're responding to 280,000 calls a year. That is tremendous. And so we've covered certainly Maplewood's police department on and off throughout the years, and that is very small compared to this. Maplewood has roughly around 53 to 55 sworn officers in their department, compared to St. Paul having the 612. So let's continue with our next clip.
Are working incredibly hard. 9/11 calls over the last 5 years are up 23%, as you know. Year to date, the Part 1 crime index is up about 6%. Last year, as you remember, we were down about 7.2%, so that crime rate ebbs and flows. The 6% increase year to date is driven largely in part by theft and burglary calls.
Now, this 6% increase, as you heard, is attributable primarily to theft and burglary. Generally speaking, the increase in thefts and burglaries occur when there is a poor economy, or that joblessness is up, that people do not have income, and that there is a greater desire to have to go steal something in order to generate income. So I find this fascinating that here we are, when we listen to the media, the commercial media is telling us that we have recovered out of the depression and that we are fully recovered. When you listen to the Ramsey County property tax presentation that we've covered over the last previous shows last week, the county is saying that property values have fully recovered and that the market values of all the real estate in Ramsey County are back to the pre-depression levels. And yet, here we have a statistic from the police department that says that theft and burglaries is up. So there's an inconsistency there between those sectors that say that recovery has arrived and that people are employed and everything is going great, and looking at the crime statistics, which actually might point to a different picture. So let's take a look as the chief continues with his discussion.
The review of our K-9 unit is one example of how we listen, respond, and change to ensure we are meeting our high standards. In 2018, as you know, we took a hard look at this unit, its purpose, its effectiveness, and its value. An audit was conducted, everything was on the table, and the audit was completed earlier this year. 38 recommendations were made around training, oversight, and investing in our resources. And we took the audit to heart. I know going into the audit that the K-9 unit was among the best in the country. We consistently win national championships, and we've done that again this year. But we also know that we need to be the best on the street. We dug in and made the critical changes recommended in the audit. 35 out of the 38 audit recommendations have been implemented to date. We have updated our policy, which better aligns with the shared community values. We added a commander and a sergeant to this unit, and we have enhanced our training. And perhaps most importantly, we have reiterated the fact that tracking is the primary purpose of a K-9 unit. This year, K-9s have successfully located guns. They have successfully located people involved in violent crimes, and we have done this without any physical apprehensions. That's not to say it won't happen, because I know and you know that it will happen at some point, but when it does happen, it'll be reasonable, necessary, and done with respect.
Now, this audit is specifically, as he indicated, of their K-9 unit. And a year or so ago, we reported on the fact that there were a number of incidents involving the St. Paul Police Department and their use of K-9s, and unfortunate incidences that happened with the K-9s where they attacked or mauled somebody who maybe they shouldn't have attacked or mauled. And that, of course, ended in bad press for St. Paul, litigation, settlement, and a whole lot of other problems. And so here he's addressing the fact that they did an audit of the K-9 unit, and that the audit came back with 38 recommendations, and that so far they've got 35 of them implemented. Now, I do think it's important that he made that distinction between the fact that they receive all kinds of awards when they go to tournaments versus how they actually operate on the street. Because Mr. Bradley, as we've seen oftentimes what happens in municipalities, is that they always point to their awards that they're getting from some or other governmental organization as the validation for their efforts, rather than looking at the practice of what they do in reality. And we've talked about, say, for instance, Maplewood, that they talk about, oh, we get this financial award every year from the Association of Municipal Financial Department directors or whatever it is. And in reality, Maplewood has been playing financial shell games for years that has got them into various financial pickles that they are working desperately to get out of. And we have covered those financial issues on these programs. So just because you get an award out by some organization that wants to give kudos to government doesn't mean that you actually are doing an award-winning job. Mr. Bradley.
And I would like to have them take a look at something here, because I did have one other article I did have, and I'm saving for this side of the issue, and it's talking in the Star Tribune, and this happens to be of July 26th. It's talking about St. Paul looks at adding shelters. And what it really talks about is that if you really take a look at the increase in all the petty crimes and all that stuff, why don't we take a look at it compared to how much new shelters have been added to? And they were talking about that they just had added a new $100 million project by the Catholic Charities. So what they're really talking about is the fact that we have had an increase in a lot of poor people that are coming into St. Paul, which has had no growth in industry. And when they talk about house prices stabilizing, that doesn't mean that they've been growing. That means they've reached the pre-recession
And the
levels.
point that we made on our previous shows is that the ones who are saying that the market values have gone back up to pre-depression values is the county assessor, who of course is the county who gets the tax revenue
Right.
from those values. It's not necessarily independent third-party appraisals making that determination.
And how is that compared to Hennepin County, Carver County, and the other counties that are around?
Right.
I believe that if you take a comparison on them, we might have reached that because that's the extent they can actually charge in this county. But you take a look at the other counties, they're actually having growth,
Right.
which we aren't seeing.
Right, and Mr. Bradley, I'm glad that you brought up this issue of the increase of the indigent in St. Paul.
Right.
And certainly that is an issue that has to be taken care of at a some type of societal level, because you can't just have people left without some kind of safety net. But what it does do, and this is something that I'm glad you brought up, is that it helps to contribute to what it is that the police department in St. Paul has to manage.
Right.
Because that's part of the environment that they have to work every day, and it's part of the calls that they are serving. And later on, Police Chief Axtell will actually address some of those issues. And so I thank you for bringing that article and tying that into this. So as we continue, the police chief then is going to continue to talk about the K-9 unit.
We still have 3 audit recommendations to go based on this report, adding a 3rd sergeant, which will be included in our 2020 budget proposal, adding security measures to the K-9 unit facility, investing in updating record-keeping systems, which are now in the process of being purchased. The improvements we've made to the K-9 unit is only one example of how we're being more progressive and responsive.
Now, Mr. Bradley, on numerous programs in the past, you've talked about the importance of training.
Right.
Well, certainly this is one of those recommendations that they had for the K-9 unit, is the training that that they need to incorporate into what they are doing. And from what I understand, some of the policies and some of the training and some of the techniques they were using were a little either antiquated, or that they weren't the proper ones to be using in a congested urban setting. And I was happy to hear the police chief say that they have identified that the key purpose of a K-9 unit is tracking, not apprehension, not physical apprehension, which of course means that the dog chases somebody down and grabs their leg or grabs their arm or mauls them. That the primary purpose of a K-9 unit is tracking, because of their heightened scent capabilities of being able to follow that scent, to find that gun, to find that person and point to where it is, so then the police officers can do the proper apprehension.
And I should add detection too, because of
Yes.
on pullovers, they always like to have a dog there to detect if there happens to be drugs.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
the other thing we have to look at.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, it sounds like they're getting on the right track. Well, let's continue.
And we're working to make better use of our technology. One example of this is to expand our online police reporting system. This will allow us to provide better customer service to the people who call for police services with the lowest levels of police service calls. And also allows us to maintain the high urgent 911 calls in a thoughtful way. Earlier this year, we changed our structure. We aligned our units to maximize efficiencies and coordination of investigations. We expanded our mental health unit and established our community engagement division. The community engagement division is an investment in our city's future, which was established without increasing our budget. It was designed to build trust throughout the city, especially with communities traditionally underrepresented in law enforcement.
This is a list of all the other various improvements that they have made in the St. Paul Police Department, trying to be more efficient with their reporting, using technology better, doing community outreach. Now, Mr. Bradley, of course, I'm always skeptical when a governmental entity says that they are going to do more community outreach, because we see time and time again that those are just buzzwords that are empty, they're hollow, and really there isn't anything new or different going on. So we're going to have to really keep our eyes open on this one to find out if this is true community engagement or if this is just another big fake out. We really don't know, but we're going to be open-minded about it because it could be the exception to the rule. Let's continue.
We also know that collecting and making the most of the data takes a deliberate effort. Officers spend more time today collecting and receiving data than ever before. Investigations have become more complex and time-consuming, and our current staffing model predates the opening of the digital floodgates. As I look here at a couple of my classmates, John Bannemer, Senior Commander, Deputy Chief Matt Topol, we came on the job in 1989, 30 years ago, and we would get into our squad car and we had a radio, a pack set radio. We had a squad radio, and at the time, Chief McCutcheon even took our AM/FM radios out because he wanted us to pay attention to what was going on in the community. That was our technology.
And of course, nowadays they have laptops in the police car. They have all kinds of technology. There's license plate readers. There's other kinds of software and gizmos and gadgets. And as you heard, one of the police officers' biggest part of their day-to-day duties is data collection. Well, of course, this has brought a concern to many people's mind as to what is the value or what extent is all of this data being used and collected for. And that's, of course, another program and another topic for another day. But we've also touched on that topic on these programs in the past, and about the whole issue of body cam retention and the data generated from that. There's all kinds of data that the police department is collecting every single day, 24/7, on everybody who happens to be part of the community service. So let's continue.
I've been thinking about the data that we got back. I think it is a sign of success. We are getting so much information. And I've also been thinking about the power dynamics around who feels comfortable reporting what to that online survey. So, thinking about, are there people who are afraid to use the survey to report to SPPD about something SPPD has done to them? People who may come from historically over-policed communities or backgrounds who feel less confident that our systems are going to work in their favor. And how are we thinking about ways that we can create room for people to give feedback to the city somehow? It might not be SPPD, but it might be their council office.
Now, Councilmember Nelson there is bringing up a good question, is that how do you know if you've got a good cross-section when you have online surveys to know that you're getting the good with the bad? Now, previously, a few months ago, we reported on a particular survey of St. Paul police officers' actions that was completed by residents in the community, and that it was citing a number of incidents where it looked like there was police officers overstepping their bounds when it comes to the use of force. Well, okay, so she's bringing up the other issue is that if you are have your surveys online, what if people feel like they are going to be identified? So if they don't want to talk about what they feel has been done to them by the police department, so they don't want to bring on retaliation, maybe they just aren't responding. Well, that's a good and valid question. How do you make sure that you have a good cross-section, that you can't just say, well, we've got all this good data, and so therefore we must be doing a great job.
We have had a problem with a certain city council in Maplewood, like the North End Working Group, where they said, well, all these people agree upon it, but when you start taking a look at who was the North End Working Group and the people that were actually attending the meetings on every day, you found that 80 to 90% of the people happened to be the city's own people that were there. So you got to question, when it's not independent, how well it's going to be and how it really reflects on the public because of, like I said, with the North End Working Group, which I was part of, I felt like I was rather cheated because of a lot of the good ideas were not even being reflected. And the bad ideas that they wanted to push were being said, well, our group came up with them, and their group happened to be the 90% against the 10% that was actually the real public out there.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that shows another great example of what we're talking about, and that when the public hears the results of these surveys or the reports as a result of some task force of some sort, you have to question what was the makeup of that group, what is the cross-section of the people who responded, who participated. Let's continue.
I worry that if we don't account for that potential set of data that we might be missing, that we are prematurely taking the wrong lessons away, or that we should acknowledge there is positive feedback. But I almost feel like the data set that I would be most interested in is, are the police now working for groups whom they historically hasn't in the past, or are we actually getting like an echo chamber of residents who have always been reliably able to feel trust in police, and we are getting like a thumbs up from them and taking that away as like applicable to everybody. So it's just something I've been thinking about in terms of when people self-report into our data sets, like how do we make the best use of that information? Do you have any thoughts on, how to account for things that we're not getting and the power dynamics of reporting to SPVD with this specific tool? I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Councilmember Nelson, thank you for your question. Yeah, we don't have all the answers. We're certainly looking for ideas and ways to continue to do that. One of the answers that we have come up with and with our department is to, in line with engaging our community at historic levels, is to create a community engagement unit, now a community engagement division that helps us build that conduit between communities, underrepresented communities, underserved members of our communities, and their police department.
So for instance, if you have a lot of respondents from, say, the Highland Park area, you may get totally different responses than if all of your respondents, or a great portion of them, were from the various shelters where the homeless people live.
Right.
So you would maybe get different answers. Or if you had a high proportion of people from the east side of St. Paul. So I think the question of Councilmember Nelson is very valid. How are you going to make sure that you don't have this bias in your study, in your report, to make sure that you actually have a good cross-section? Because that's the only way that the data will actually be validated for the community, is if it is a good cross-section. And so, as we've brought up, you've said that they've increased the housing for the homeless in St. Paul. Maybe they need to send one of their community outreach people to those complexes and talk to those folks, because those folks are not answering online surveys, or most likely they're not, because they don't probably have the day-to-day access to the internet in order to go and fill out a survey on their satisfaction with the St. Paul Police Department. So you see there again, that is a roadblock to great participation, is that if it is just an online survey, not everybody has access to the internet. And perhaps those underserved communities have even less access to the internet where the survey is. Let's continue.
My comment / question is coming from a place of wanting to analyze the data we have. Like, if we have 5,000 positive comments and then 20 negative ones, and the takeaway is we're overwhelmingly doing well, but then you analyze the data further based on the extent we can and find that, you know, the vast majority are coming from wealthier, whiter, historically more invested in, you know, less prone to bad racial dynamics, et cetera, places, and then the folks that are having a hard time. Like, it's just like, what story are we taking away from the data we have? And I guess I'm just expressing a desire to dig deeper, to not dismiss where we have good feedback, because we want like a no news is good news or good news is good news reality, but also to not take the wrong lesson away or potentially be premature. And then,
isn't it wonderful to hear a council person talk open and frank about this and saying, we're not just looking for a feel-good story here. We're not just looking for the no news is good news story here. Isn't that wonderful, Mr. Bradley?
It is.
Have you ever really heard a council person speak so clearly and plainly about wanting to understand what is the true reality of the service they are providing their residents? I found this incredibly refreshing. We so seldom see this or even catch it on film for this program. And if we could, we would do it more often, but very seldom is this type of candor from an elected person out there.
It's also insightful in the fact that it says that I am limited by what the people I work for, which elected me. And the reality is, what we find is a lot of times we're taking on what other groups and agencies want us to fund and operate under, and that isn't really the reality that you have to live, because of the people that are living in that neighborhood have to pick up the costs. And that's what we have to look at. So, and I think she's stating that in a very forceful way, that I want to know what are the real costs to us for making these type of decisions, which right now we don't really see. We don't see that decision making being done.
Now, in this next clip, there were some people who were at this workshop, at this organizational meeting, people from the public, and one of them could not control himself, and so he had something to say, and he said it. So let's take a look.
You guys still have crimes on the east side. Maryland Avenue, Payne Avenue, there's drug dealers, fights, downtown St. Paul, Metro Transit's not doing nothing. What are you guys doing? Where's the money? Where are you guys spending the money on?
I sense your frustration, and I'm sorry for your frustrations, and I'll give you my card after the meeting, and
You know who I am.
we'll
My name is
connect.
Howard Jackson.
I do, Mr. Jackson, thank you very much.
Tim Walsh promoted Melissa Horton, Gunners. I want all you guys to know this.
We hear you, although,
Public human corruption is going on.
Thank you,
right,
sir.
and
This
this,
is the department. Tim Washington promoted Melissa Horton, who's Gunnison. I just want to speak. My name is Howard Jackson.
I'm sorry, but this is not the venue for that, and there are venues for that we are convening in the
St.
future.
Paul Police Department hasn't done nothing. They haven't even stopped or slowed down crimes. Tell me to step down. I don't think he's the real leader for St. Paul. No.
Thank you,
That's all
sir.
I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Hopefully I hear from you, Axtell.
Thank you.
You haven't responded back to me yet.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
So this gentleman clearly is concerned about crime on the east side. That's more than likely where a lot of that increase, that 6%, has occurred in the increase in thefts and burglaries. And he's wondering, where is the money going? What are you guys doing? And you could hear, though, that the police chief said, I want to work with you. Well, I hope indeed that the police chief was true to his word and actually then did take the time out to talk to this gentleman and find out what his concerns were and how they can work together on addressing those concerns in his neighborhood. Because after all, that is part of the mission of a police department, not only just to respond to calls, but to provide that community outreach, community policing. That's part of what people come to expect of their police department. Now we have one last clip. Let's take a look.
The hands-free law that is going to be implemented on August 1st, I believe. Sometimes policy has unintended consequences, like the racial profiling and different things like that. And I'm just curious, what is the department doing proactively to prevent that sort of thing, but also ensure that the law is enforced, because we do have a lot of distracted driving.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Tao. So we have ongoing conversations over the last 3 years about the impact of policing in this community, which is why I drew back the curtains of 15 years worth of traffic stop data, knowing that the numbers were ugly, if you will, showing that there's disproportionate rates of traffic stops and citations that go to our communities of color in this city, as they do in any other city throughout the country. Each year now, we implemented a plan where our officers review their individual data with their supervisors on their employee evaluations, to have an honest conversation about, here's our numbers, and making sure that we all understand that implicit bias is a human condition. Every human being possesses implicit bias, but we want to make sure that implicit bias never plays a role in how we police our community. And you can't really do that unless you acknowledge everybody, every human being possesses a level of implicit bias. So we worked hard. Every year, our officers go through implicit bias training, an annual commitment. We used to do it after something bad happened. We don't wait for something bad to happen. We do it proactively each and every year. But I can also tell you that 33% of the landmass in the city of St. Paul are areas of concentrated poverty with over 50% diverse members. That's a large percentage of our city. And I can also tell you, when you lay the shots fired, the people injured by gunfire, the crimes that are occurring in our city, predominantly a high portion and percentage of that is in our areas of high levels of concentrated poverty. Is that to say people who have less resources commit higher crimes? Absolutely not. But we have to study what really leads to crime. Crime, I believe, is a symptom of disproportionate gaps in our healthcare system, our school system, our finances, our housing, and I could go on and on and on and on. And when people hit walls in those areas I talked about, in addition to others, they have a higher likelihood of becoming a part of the criminal justice system. That's a reality that we have to face. And we can't dump it all on the shoulders of the cops to say that the cops are racist, because I expect that our officers are going to be in areas of our community that people have higher likelihood of being injured by gunfire or being killed. I have a duty and obligation to do that. So we have to have honest conversations as to why people are getting into the criminal justice system and not throwing it all on the cops.
What an open and frank conversation and discussion of this issue by the police chief of St. Paul. We've covered numerous reports out of the Maplewood Police Department, other police departments, county sheriff departments, and this is really the first time that I have heard a police chief speak so clearly about the nexus between crime and poverty and the lack of health care and the lack of other resources in the community and the lack of jobs. So what St. Paul and the East Side needs to work on is good paying, sustainable jobs so that people can earn a good living. And likewise, in Maplewood, they want to focus on let's build more voucher housing. Instead, they should be working on what is going to help the community as a whole for everybody and for the economy, and say, let's work on getting good paying, sustainable jobs, because that will then help many of these other issues. So I want to thank the police chief for being so upfront about the reality that is going on in our communities, because we had to hear from a police chief, not just on this program, not just from Mr. Bradley and myself, but you heard it from the St. Paul police chief.
And I want to add one other thing, going back to that article. What it did say there was that when you take a look at the St. Paul area, there is 2,259 as October of last year. And at that point, that was a 10% growth. So now St. Paul isn't the big city. Now, as Minneapolis is supposed to be matching or actually exceeding St. Paul's growth of the indigent, they should be looking at 30 to 35% of that, because they're much bigger than St. Paul is.
You're looking at proportional share.
Right.
Good point, Mr. Bradley. Now I want to thank you for being here on our program today.
Thank you for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this week's news program. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
33% of the landmass in the city of St. Paul are areas of concentrated poverty with over 50% diverse members. That's a large percentage of our city. And I can also tell you, when you lay the shots fired, the people injured by gunfire, the crimes that are occurring in our city, predominantly a high portion and percentage of that is in our areas of high levels of concentrated poverty. Is that to say people who have less resources commit higher crimes? Absolutely not. But we have to study what really leads to crime. Crime, I believe, is a symptom of disproportionate gaps in our healthcare system, our school system, our finances, our housing, and I could go on and on and on and on. And when people hit walls in those areas I talked about, in addition to others, they have a higher likelihood of becoming a part of the criminal justice system. That's a reality that we have to face. And we can't dump it all on the shoulders of the cops to say that the cops are racist, because I expect that our officers are going to be in areas of our community that people have higher likelihood of being injured by gunfire or being killed. I have a duty and obligation to do that. So we have to have honest conversations as to why people are getting into the criminal justice system and not throwing it all on the cops, because I just told you about what we're doing about it internally. But I would ask, what is everybody doing about it?
Sure.
Mr.
Just
Todd.
a quick follow-up question to that. Thank you, sir. So would it be possible if we can get a report annually on citation or stops that are made for a distracted driver and not yielding for a pedestrian? Can we do that? Can you provide that next year?
Absolutely, we could provide it by the end of the day. We keep those statistics. We're happy to share that with you. Matter of fact, John, if you could just jot that down, we'll share it with the entire council, our stats on those citations and our efforts on distracted driving.
Yeah, and I think those data are important because we can use it as education purposes to educate our drivers to be safe on the roads.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a few scattershot things. You just alluded to this a minute ago when you were answering Mr. Tao's question, but one of the things that I notice is that that social media can tend to amplify or create a sense that things are worse than they are, or that they're reported, something might be reported from a scanner but there's not a follow-up report on what the call actually was. And there are so many instances where we go into a community meeting and people are convinced that, break-ins are out of control, gunshots are out of control, the numbers are increasing and increasing. And when you look at the actual data, numbers are universally down. Maybe some exceptions in certain areas, but generally down. Is there anything that the police department is doing to manage? I mean, we deal with this as well, but anything that the police department is doing to manage the spread of misinformation or misinformation on social media?
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, this is something we're definitely concerned about, and with the resources we have right now, we're mostly focusing on misinformation that may be, or information that isn't entirely clear in the media. We do have a social media coordinator in our department that had just left our agency, and now we're in the process of hiring a new one. But we want to do as much as we can. But as you know, with Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and all of the social media sites and all the neighborhood groups. I used to, when I was the Western District Senior Commander, I joined as many Facebook groups, neighborhood groups, Hamlin Midway, Frogtown Neighbors, and others, and I found it to be, it was wonderful, but it was overwhelming. And it's something that it takes a lot of time, and so the resource to really take a look at when the St. Paul Police Department gets tagged or somebody's talking about shots fired or burglaries, to be able to proactively say, thanks for your comment, here are the actual statistics, or here's what happened on this specific call. I would love to be able to do that, and something moving in the future down the road, maybe we can talk about how we get that done.
Yeah, and I just think it's something that is increasingly influences all of us every day, and we want to make sure that the facts are what's shared, or that when facts become known, that we're able to share those. And again, it's beyond just police reporting, but I'm just curious. I know that you guys have a strong online presence. Two others. One is we did increase funding to the mental health unit. We are very supportive of the work that they're doing, and I'm just curious at this point if you have any quantifiable or even anecdotal reports about the impacts of the increased work of the mental health department, and if it is creating less work for other police officers on those mental health related calls.
Council President Redmond, thank you. I think it's too early to really be specific about the direct impact. I can tell you right now we have 6 officers assigned with co-responders. We just expanded that to the afternoon shift as well. So I believe what we're going to see moving forward, and we're seeing some of this now, but it's too early and the data set's too small to talk about, how long it's taking for officers to get the calls based on the call load. And we're focusing on that through everything that we're doing with the mental health unit. Is not just approaching people struggling with mental illness with dignity and respect, but also trying to stop the repeat calls for service. And I believe we're seeing some of that, but it's too early for me to ring the bell and say that we did it.
Okay. Yeah. I figured, but I think it is something that we're all curious about. We're very supportive. I think I can speak for all of us and say that we're very supportive of that work and the leadership in that department. But curious if there was information. It sounds maybe by the end of the year we'll hear more about that. Did you have something on that topic, Ms. Nelson? I did also want to ask about, or just share that through our policy sessions and through meeting with the community engagement unit, it's become clear to the council that the police department is doing a landlord training program, but so is our DSI department. And we are curious if you're working with the DSI to figure out if you're doing the same training, if there's some way that those trainings could be merged together. It does seem kind of odd that 2 departments are offering landlord training, and none of us really knew that until it came up in a policy session. And it's something I think we'd like to at least understand why we're having 2, or if there's a path forward where we can make it easier for landlords to get the training and just have 1.
Sure. Thank you, Council President. We have been doing landlord training, crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, multi-unit family housing for over 20 years. And what we can do is, we'll provide, again, we'll add that to the list of information of what our current posture is on that. And then we'll find out what DSI does and take a look at what's the difference, if any.
Yeah, and it may be that it's just very distinctly different things that you're doing, but we have heard, we know that when we go out to talk to landlords about eviction training or other trainings, that they're very happy to get more training and more information. And we want to make it as simple as possible for them. So here I am saying we're doing landlord training too. Now there's 3 of us.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Ms. Nelson, you had something?
Yeah, I guess I didn't immediately react because I was kind of taking time to process, but I want to come back to something you said about, a viewpoint I understand, and I would say I have a lot of overlap with, which is that crime is a symptom of gaps in our healthcare and school and finances and housing systems, and when people reach a breaking point, they have a higher likelihood of becoming part of the criminal justice system. And I am with you to the point where you say that we can't dump it all on our officers and say that they are racist. And I understand that this comment is coming from a place of reacting to, the fact that our officers are often spending time in historically disinvested communities and all these things. I just think, as coming up in context to talking about implicit bias, I just think we can't be that defensive and be reactive to the concept of racism in our community in a way that's not just deeply honest and willing to grapple with that. I think that anti-racist culture, no matter where you are in your position in society, is about seeing it as both institutional and having historical roots in systems that are still present and active, and also that you as a human live in that culture and carry it around, and that our society socializes a fear of blackness and socializes all of these things that show up in the way we have interactions. And I've been reading recently about how implicit bias is scientifically been researched to kick in hardcore in fight or flight or more high danger situations. That is when implicit bias is triggered even more. And knowing that that's, assuming we follow that research and it holds up and that we know our officers are more likely to be in violent situations, the threat of implicit bias kicking in, even with good trainings and good intentions and vigilance, is even higher. So I know that you're digging into all these things. I push us to go deeper, to be open-handed, to just be honest, to not be afraid to talk about racism in the force, racism in our systems. I feel accountable to being anti-racist as a city council person who makes choices for thousands of people. I guess I'm just still processing that, and I would like us to go further. And the other piece I'm still sitting with is I appreciate a lot people being willing to ask questions about PCARC and you being willing to talk about PCARC. And I'm still just in a place where I feel like I have more questions than answers. I want to see PCARC go well. There's been a lot of history in the past handful of years where it's been really rocky. And I would like us to be able to turn the page and just start from a place of, we just need mutual public honesty and more sharing about what's happening. I feel like right now the public learns about it in a series of op-eds that kind of go back and forth. And so I'm digging in to just figure out what is happening. But I think that when there's turmoil, people are just left with more anxiety than resolution. And I sort of feel that way, just honestly, as a council person who my entire job isn't public safety. My entire job is all these things in addition to public safety. And so sometimes it can just feel like there's so much to grapple with in addition to what we're responsible for, and I want to make sure we don't neglect it. So I want to just say that I'd like to keep talking about PCARC with all of our partners. I know that you're getting a lot of questions about it as the chief, but it includes conversations with our mayor's office, with all of us around the table. I don't currently feel confident that we are headed for a better future, and I don't want to feel that way. I think I'd like to see it get better, and I appreciate you being willing to show up in those conversations.
I don't want to have the
Councilmember
partners,
Nelson.
before you go, just I think one thing to, one name you forgot on the list was Hero.
And Hero, yes, sir.
Because we chose to put the PCR under Hero. And we do have an obligation to bring Hero in to talk about this as well. So, you can respond. I just wanted to be clear that one of the reasons why this is a challenge for you to answer is because it's under Hero.
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Nelson, thank you so much. And I want you to know the words that you say, I don't dismiss. I'm not only hear you, I listen to you, and I take those words to heart. And my only thought earlier when I was talking about not dumping everything on our officers is that I think we have to try to prevent the broad stroke approach of painting an entire group of people based on a lower percentage of incidents that happen, because that's a slippery slope, regardless of what group you're talking about, is my only point. So, thank you.